I'm real happy, and right below it, I'm going to put, I wish I'd have known all this earlier, because I lived for years not fully understanding a subject that I should have really delved into. But for some reason, I was deceived. I thought it was trivial.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, John Gallagher. Dr. Mike Hayes, it's great to have you on the Uncommon Leader Podcast. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great, John. It's really good to be on with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You are welcome, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I already regret not hitting the record button as soon as we got started. We had some great things to talk about already, so let's see if we can keep that conversation going. But I will start you off the same way I start off all my first-time guests, and that's to ask you to tell me a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are today as a person or as a leader.
Well, my dad and mom, John, were very different people. Beautifully married for 60 years. Both of them passed now. But dad was a clown and a fun lover and a hard worker. And mom was a thinker and a contemplator and a very wise woman. So when I was and my dad had been a pastor, and I'd been around that environment. And we did a lot of missions work among Native Americans in northern Arizona. And that was my background. And I really did feel a call early on, maybe 14. I was sitting down in the kitchen with mom. I used to have conversations with her while she was fixing dinner. And I said, Mom, I got a problem. She said, What is it? And I said, Well, I really feel like I have a calling on my life to make a difference and do something for people. But I I can't, if I can do it without having to get up in front of people and talk, I'll do anything. And because that was my paradigm.
Hmm.
If you're gonna be a leader, you got to speak. And I was really bashful. I didn't have any guts for getting up in front of a crowd of people. And I said, Mom, I watch. She said, Well, a lot of guys are doing that, and you. I said, I know. I watch a lot of them, but here's the problem. I'm not only bashful, but I can't do it like they're doing it. I don't even want to do it like they're doing it. And just a little statement turned it around for me, John. And Mom said, You know what, Mike? You don't have to do it like they do it. That's not what you're called to do. You do it like you're supposed to, but do it. If you feel that call, you're not in it to emulate anyone else. Do it like you do it, but do it. And gosh, some of the most insecure leaders that I see, John, and you and I both know that there are leaders that are leading, but they're insecure. And some of the most insecure leaders that I see are guys that have not figured out yet who they are. You can tell that you, in fact, I told a guy the other day, I can tell who you've been with in the first 5 minutes of talking to you because you're talking just like them.
Mm.
So we got to get our own identity.
Mike, I appreciate that. And the story, of that, right? You don't have to do it like others. And even as you coach and mentor others now, whether they're in the church or whether they're business leaders that attend as well, is that you have that story. You have that experience of the insecurities that you had. You are,
Yep.
really qualified, if you will, to help them because that was you. And I've heard the quote before, you're most powerfully positioned to help the person that you used to be. I think it's absolutely true. And we use those
Yeah.
stories from our past to influence how we influence more in the future. So I am glad that your mom told that to you and you overcame. I've heard some of your messages online, and I think you have a powerful approach, absolutely, in your own way, and it works really well. Thank you for sharing
Thank
that.
you.
And it lines up with probably some of the other things you've saying is that you've got something to say. You're a multi-time author, if you will, but you have a new one that just came out. Real happy. Jesus' surprising path to genuine joy. So why that's the primary way we got connected today was that book. I know we have more than that to talk about today, but let's start with the book. Why is it that you wrote that book and who did you write it for?
Interesting question, John. I was actually about 7 years ago. I go to Israel about every year, and I had taken about 100 pilgrims that wanted to tour the country. We were up in the north of Galilee, and back in those days, they didn't have like a church and a porch and all that built where you could sit down formally. They just had the hillside with the boulders on it and the poppies growing everywhere where Jesus would have sat. There wasn't a building there in those days. And I had finished teaching on the Beatitudes and just felt this gentle nudge to write a book about it. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, John. My first reaction, I mean, anytime I think it's a God thing, I sure don't want to say no. But my first reaction shows my ignorance about the subject because I literally said in my response to what I felt, because there was a real, after I'd taught that day, the people were picking like a poppy to remember. There was like a gentle, uh, impactful, kind of a peaceful contemplation everybody was in. It was a really sweet thing going on. So when I felt that in my heart, the first thing I said to God was, "Why don't you pick something like really important to you?" Because I mean, I've got a doctorate in philosophy and theology, and you want me to write about happy? And that shows my ignorance, John,
Mm,
because I was right where a lot of well-meaning but religious people are, and not just Christians. What I've learned in my comparative religion studies is that every religion, every major religion, Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, Shinto, it doesn't matter what, Judaism, all of them, whether by design or mistake, all of them have painted their deity, whatever their God is supposed to be like, is mostly angry,
mm,
reluctant, judgmental, and dishing out a lot of shame. And John, I was raised by really good people, but I'm telling you, whether it was their fault or mine, by the time I was 12 or 14 years old, I loved God. I wanted to know him better, but I was so full of shame. It was like if I didn't know I'd done something wrong, then there must be something you're not looking for deep enough because there's something you've done wrong all the time. Because I just never had the feeling that I measured up. It didn't matter how good you were never quite good enough. And so I bore that weight, and I'm telling you, as Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, his first sermon and one of his greatest, it's not possible to be anxious about something and be happy at the same time.
mm,
So Jesus literally in the Sermon on the Mount attacks anxiety and gives us all the points we need for overcoming it, why we have it and how we overcome it. And that's why I put a red poppy on the front of the book, because we were sitting among the poppies. And that's what Jesus said. The translators changed the word in the 15th century, but they got it wrong. It was right in the beginning. They translated it. Here's the way the first beatitude translates. And this is where the trouble starts.
mm,
The beatitude reads like this in English: Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Well, that's a bad translation into English on several levels. One of them is that the word translated blessed are sort of gives us a kind of a blessed are, kind
mhm,
of a prayerful religious thing, when in fact Jesus used the pop culture Greek word makarios, which means to be filled with joy and happiness. But to the Greeks, John, makarios was a happiness only reserved for the deity, for gods. The gods of the Greek culture could enjoy happiness, but not us commoners.
mm,
People are just here to suffer through, and the gods live in opulence and joy, and we live hopelessly. That was dragged over from the Greek culture in through the Romans and had infected the land of Israel during Jesus' time. And that's why he was saying, "What are you so anxious about? Look at these red poppies. They didn't work, they didn't toil, they didn't labor, but Solomon in all his glory was never dressed like one of them.
mm,
Stop worrying and be happy." So when he used that, and then I began to really do the research on his 8 Beatitudes that all begin with the first one translated, I just shared with you, blessed are the poor in spirit, actually gave rise to major denominations creating vows of poverty for all
mm,
those who worked for the church, because after all, Jesus said you'd be blessed if you're poor. But that's not what it said. What he said was, it's really interesting, John. The first beatitude of the eight says, Makarios, really happy are those who present an empty place. The Greek word is literally void, a void for me to fill. See, we're all scared to death of empty things. Somebody didn't call us back. The warehouse is half empty. And God actually says, I like empty places because it gives me a chance to fill something with something you don't have. So the first beatitude is literally, if you'll give me some empty place inside you where I can fill it, you'll be really happy. So the journey started there, and 6 years later, we released the book, not knowing, John, what kind of things we were going to face in those 5 years.
Oh,
Here I am writing a book on happiness, and COVID hits. My daughter shares with us she's got a second bout of stage 4 cancer. My son is in leadership with me at the church and hits a wall and has to resign and get some help. He's doing well, thank God now, and so is my daughter. But during those dark days, I thought I was going to lose both of my children,
wow.
And then I had turned the church over to them, the younger generation. And when my son resigned, I sat in, and Covenant is a major church. You know, it's 5 campuses and 10,000 people or so. So there's a lot to it. I sat in a young man that was my son in the gospel that I'd trained and educated, and he'd worked with me for 20 years. And he dies with COVID, 10 days, and he was 56 years old, picture of health. 2 boys playing college football, and he gets COVID and dies in 10 days. So, and I'm writing a book on happiness. So I had no idea what I was about to face. But the good news is, John, that we have discovered a kind of happiness and a level of happiness that absolutely cannot be offended in the worst of times. It is a strong foundation, and you don't process. I've written 8 books. This is my 8th, and it's impacted me personally more than any book I've written.
It certainly sounds that way in terms of the stories, the experiences that you've had, and again, the opportunity to be able to feel happy in those times is so important. Mike, you coach leaders, you have mentored others. Um, you're a champion inside of your church still now for unity. When you think about that, and with whether it's with your congregation or again those leaders that you coach that come to you for help, the COVID, those cancer things are many things that keep them from happy. Look, I remember, and I don't think my parents ever said it to me, but I remember hearing adults telling their kids, "I'll put the fear of God into you." To have that and be that, that fear versus, the happiness or joy that comes with it. What are some of the things that you see today that keep them from experiencing that happiness that is in those Beatitudes, that is in that Sermon on the Mount?
Well, one of the things I see, John, for sure, is that young leaders we've been bit by the materialism bug, and we place a lot of importance on what we have or what somebody else has that we wish we had. And we have this unbelievable smorgasbord of information, more than we ever had in our lives, with the advent of internet and smartphones and AI. Um, I figured something out. You don't even have to have a relationship with God to be a pastor and preach pretty good sermons. Now you can ask AI to build you one, and he'll do it in about 30 seconds and give you 30 minutes worth of material, but it doesn't do anything for you on your inside. So
That's
what
right.
I'm finding in the guys I'm coaching, even in business, John, is that they some of them are really unhappy because they've been successful in every way they were told they could be successful, and it's not what they thought it was going to be when they got there. I just had a business leader yesterday I was coaching tell me, I'm just unhappy. My business is doing great. He's got 40 restaurants. I don't know what all else he has. But he said, what I built is a monster that requires my time and my thought day and night. And I don't really know what I'm doing this for anymore because just the toys are not doing it. I'm going to have to get some kind of important purpose for what I'm doing. It's like our friend John Maxwell. You and I talked about him
Mm-hmm.
before coming on. John was at my church one time and he said, he told the crowd there, business people, he said, and this is so true, John. He said, the passions for giving to a cause and changing the world, the fires of those passions are not lit by passing a plate under his nose at offering time. And that's true. Successful people are often driven people, and they've got to have some kind of reason. Why are we doing all this? And when they don't figure that out, they are really in trouble. And John, I do want to mention this because it's really pertinent, and it is the subsequent book that Dr. Jeff and I are coming out with, the first of 25. It ties to Real Happy, and it's called Real Hope. Redeeming the Apocalypse to a Victorious Outcome is the subtitle. Because everybody's looking for the apocalypse of the world. How's it going to end? When's it going to end? It's probably going to be in our lifetime. What is the mark of the beast going to look like? I'm scared of this and scared of that. And what's resulted in that, which is, in my opinion, bad doctrine, by the way, but what's resulted in that is a generation of people who don't understand, why would I work this hard to be polishing brass on a sinking Titanic? If this is all going to come to nothing, what are we doing this for? And that's why our research on hope has led us to the teachings about the last days. Where's the world going? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to us? Is it just going to be nuclear war and
Mm.
balls of fire and the stars falling from the sky? And nobody can live filled with joy and happiness and have this sense of impending doom, like the Chicken Little kind of story, the sky is falling. So I like to say that bad doctrines always lead us to a bad outcome. And that's some bad doctrines that we picked up over the last 2 centuries in the Christian church that is killing us because we put our activity for changing the world, like I used to do in Grandpa's old truck. I've kind of thrown it into neutral and just coasting down the hill
Mm.
because I'm not sure what we're supposed to be doing. And that's what we have to do is we've got to get re-engaged and understand what our place is in really making a difference in the world.
So important. So important, Mike. And that actually goes, even you look back as well, the book Real Hope Looking Forward. Looking back, you wrote a book, Influence, Becoming the Leader That Changes the World. You are called to lead. And our
Yeah.
friend who introduced us, Nick Hutchison, he wrote a book that's Behind My Shoulder There, Rise of the Reader. And he talks about the combination of those books in terms of, can I take two books
Yeah.
and put them together and really find something? He refers to it lovingly as book sex as he brings it together. Well, and I think we could say that on a podcast like this, but
Yeah.
either way,
Yeah.
there's a level as you mentor others that you're charging them to be the leader that they were called to be. And you're also charging them to do it by being happy, by being hopeful. Yemius, you started to talk about this with a little bit of that leader that you were there. How can leaders ultimately use joy to influence others if you bring those two things together?
Well, that's a great concept, John, and that's what I'm after because I will tell you my own personal experience, and I know I'm more touchy with this than my wife, Kathy. She's always happy and always believes the best about everything and everybody. It is really difficult for me to do business with a really miserable or unhappy person. I don't want them waiting on my table for dinner. I don't want them cleaning my house. I don't want them working up under my sink to repair a pipe. If you can't have an attitude that of thankfulness, I'm glad to be here. Listen, as small a thing as Chick-fil-A changing the culture of the fast food industry. And one of the things that the founder established years ago, I know a guy that owns some Chick-fil-A, is quite a program.
Hmm.
But the old founder was right on the young people saying, don't use when somebody says thank you very much, don't say to them no problem. That's not even the answer. They didn't say there was a problem. You say it's my pleasure. Well, the reason for that is because people naturally like to interact with pleasant people. I can tell you, John, in the business world, uh, I've got a pretty good list. I'm a project guy. So I want to have my flooring guy, my electrician, my plumber. And sometimes you have to work through those relationships. But I've just figured out that people that have a basic sense of joy and happiness in their life are more pleasant to be around and they do better work.
Amen. Absolutely. So that makes it better, a better work environment, and all those things. One of the ways that you help leaders, Mike, what I've read is with your transformative process called Make Room, involves reconnecting with the core values and building connections. How do you use that to, in essence, help leaders be better leaders?
Well, I mentioned a while ago, John, the advent of internet and all that, and the unbelievable mountain of any kind of material we want to draw together that is available to us. But for leaders, I think that it has become so cluttered, and the noise, the din of noise in society is so loud. You have to intentionalize getting away, and you also have to intentionalize making room. That first parable, it used the word in the Greek void or empty. And Jesus said, happy are those who create empty spaces that I can fill. I'm not opposed to this. If you're making money at it, it's good for you. God bless you. But can you believe, John, that one of the top investment opportunities in the nation is storage buildings? Invest in storage warehouses where people that have filled their house, their closet, their garage, and their yard can now go down the street and rent another space for storing stuff.
Stuff.
So we are unbelievable at, I don't know all the reasons we do this. I know that my dad said he used to do it because he knew the pain of World War II and the uh, carefulness that they had to siphon gas and use every drop, and the food at the grocery store wasn't guaranteed. But in time of plenty, where instead of cleaning out our closet, ending up with it half full and giving the other half of it to the nearest ministry down the street that's feeding people on the street, when we've got 100 and we're standing in our closet scratching our head and can't figure out what to wear,
Hmm.
we got to give some stuff away. And I've found that clearing out space physically, because we are body, soul, and spirit, we're a triune being. So my closet and my garage is just physical. But I'm telling you, I get a lift in my mind. I get excited in my creativity when I clean out a space and make room
Hmm.
for something else. And it's the first principle of happiness. We've got too much junk in our lives. And it's much more simple. One of the reasons, John, if you don't mind me sharing this, I've coined a new word for our new book, Real Hope. And I figured out something about the way the kingdom of God works. In my lifetime, I was 20 years old in 1970 when a book came out called The Late Great Planet Earth.
Mm.
And it sold about 100 million copies. And it changed a generation to a cataclysmic change that was going to come by nuclear wars and fallen stars and the end of the world. That's why it was called The Late Great Planet Earth. And what I've learned, John, is that we have trained up a generation of people, especially exposed to that kind of Christianity. We have raised a generation of people expecting a cataclysmic end. It could be at any time, it could be at midnight tonight, and it has stolen from us the ability and the desire and the skill development to gradually keep moving the ball down the field and
Mm.
making the world a better place. So I've coined a new word called gradualism, and it's really the way the kingdom of God was designed to work. Jesus said it so plainly when he said, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. The smallest seed in your hand, you can hardly see it. But he said, if you plant it in years to come, it will be the largest tree in your area and it will give shelter to strangers and the birds can come and build nests in this massive tree. But it happened from the smallest seed and years of watering and growing it. And then he said, the kingdom is like leaven. You put a little yeast in a large ball of dough, and eventually the whole thing rises because it has spread to every cell. That's the way God's kingdom, the kingdom of light and goodness, is designed to work. Not through cataclysmic, explosive, destructive outcomes, but by gradually growing every day. It's a little better, it's a little bigger, it's a little clearer. And Paul, my influence book you mentioned, John, came about because I was here again. I was in Israel, and I was on the seacoast there on the Mediterranean at the city of Caesarea, and the guide was showing us the remains of the jail where Paul was likely held before they put him on a ship to Rome to be tried. And my book influence started from this story. How does a man like Paul, who's been beaten and put in a jail cell, then they put him on a boat to Rome to be tried as a criminal because he's trying to start an insurrection, they say. When he gets to Rome, they drop the case, they let him go, and 3 or 4 years later, best we can tell, he writes a letter to one of his churches that he oversees in Thessaloniki in Greece, and he says, greetings to all of you. All the saints in Rome send greetings, especially all of Caesar's household. And that stopped me in my tracks. And I said, my gosh, that's the influence of the gospel of Jesus Christ, is that Paul can leave Israel as a prisoner and end up in Rome as a pastor, leading most of Caesar's family to faith. That's influence. He landed there like a wet rat on the shore, and he ends up pastoring most of Caesar's family.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way the spirit of influence works. And we all have that. And that's why we got to be filled with joy.
I so appreciate it. And I love the new word. I hope you announce that today. And we're going to use that. We're going to the gradualism as you go forward.
Yeah.
I mean, as you talked about make room, and it's the space of our stuff, small s. So at least I heard a couple of things. One is be intentional. You've got to be
Yep.
intentional about that. You got to make a choice and then do something about it. And that reminds me kind of the Philippians 4:8, 4:9, where Philippians 4:8 talks about think on these things, whatever is true, noble, right, excellent, praiseworthy. Think on these things. But 4:9, you can't stop at thinking. 4:9 says you got to go out and put it into practice. Everything I've taught you got to put it into practice. That's that make room.
That's right.
And frankly, even in our heads and in our calendars, make room for what needs
No,
to be done
absolutely.
to be more intentional. I hear that in terms of what you're saying. I love the concept of gradualism. It doesn't have to be these big leaps. It's just continuous improvement over and over again. That is what God is looking for. He wants us to take action in that space. And leaders, if you pay attention to that in terms of your daily mentoring and coaching of others, you don't have to get them there in one big leap. It's
Right.
taking that axe or dripping on that rock, whatever you got to do over and over, and the water wins as you go forward. So your book, back to the specific book that we talked about today, Real Happy, and as you get others coming out, frankly, I'd love to continue the conversation as you get and bring each one of these books out. What do you want with this one specifically with regards to Real Happy? What do you want folks to feel and do as a result of reading the book after they're done reading it?
I think they feel much more happy in their lives, the real thing. Someone said to me, well, don't you think that the Bible was more interested in you having joy and not happiness because they make joy kind of a more solid thing? What we found in our research is in Jesus' day was actually just the opposite. Happiness was the real condition that was continual, and joy was what you feel at a birthday party that kind of goes away in a few minutes. And we've kind of flipped the script on that. We kind of think somehow joy sounds more spiritual, but they're really the same concept in those ancient times. And what I want people to see and that they can live with joy, John, is because there are so many things in the book, like on one of the parables, Jesus said you could be happy even though you're being persecuted for righteousness' sake. So this secular firm that's helping us out of New York market this book, they were reading that, and the first day, and I have a lot of friends that are Jews. I go to Israel a lot, but these guys said, "Look, we're basically godless Jews, and so you're going to have to train us. What is this about?" And so I said, "No, you're going to help train me because," and they really have. Like for instance, one of them, a young lady named Bella. I said to her one day in one of our work sessions, "Bella, when I say that Jesus said, 'Happy are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake,' how does that translate to you in the middle of New York City as a single woman?" And she said, "That translates really easy for me." And I said, "Really? How?" Because, I quote that and I may be seeing martyrs through the centuries that paid the sacrifice of persecution. What she saw was, she said, "Mike, it's easy when I read that to translate that into every single mom who was doing the right thing in their marriage and their husband left and left them with two kids. And they're doing the right thing every day, feeling persecuted for having stayed in the marriage, doing the right thing, working three jobs, putting food on the table for the kids. That's suffering for righteousness. It's doing the right thing, but not understanding why it happened to you. So Jesus said, 'Happy are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for they shall inherit the kingdom of God.'" So there's the blessing attached to every one of these outweighs, for instance, he said, "Happy are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." How can you be happy when you're in the middle of mourning? Does it mean that you're supposed to have a giddy laugh and just play like you didn't lose what you lost that made you sad? No. What you're going to understand is the comfort that you receive is so much greater than the pain of what caused you to mourn, that you're actually going to be happy. And I mentioned earlier, John, how this book has changed me. I recognized it even 2 days ago. I got a call about one of our family members by marriage, uh, really got smitten out of the blue by a cancer report that he just went for a checkup and wasn't suspecting anything, and then finds out he's got cancer everywhere. And it's really a tough thing, and it's a tough kind of call that you have to take and help him figure out, how am I going to tell my kids that the doctors are saying 18 to 24 months to live? Those are tough things we go through. But here's what happened to me, John. After doing the work to write this book and what it taught me, I, even in receiving that tough report, I was able to encourage him, and the pain of that bad diagnosis didn't take me to the dark depths that it used to, because I'm a real empathetic person. And your sad story would make me as sad about yours and mine as I am about mine as I am over yours. Does that make sense? I was so empathetic that I became upset and sad. And well, I can't help anybody if I'm in the hole with them. I got to be up above where I can lift them up. And I really experienced that. I said, "Kathy, this is a really tough report that we got on this call, but it didn't take me where it used to." And then one of the biggest ones, John, if we've got time for one more right quick.
Absolutely.
This is a personal testimony. I always thought of meek and weak as sort of synonymous terms. So I didn't like using that Jesus was meek because it seemed like that's weak. But what I learned, and this has been one of the most beautiful studies, and we actually met a guy who filled in the blanks for us, but I had learned that in biblical times, the use of the word meek was a word that was used by the Romans who were occupiers in Jesus' day of Israel to speak of the attitude they looked for in their horses of war. The Romans were the first army that brought in Europe that brought horses into warfare. They got them in Spain. They were bred for their strength and their courage, but they had to be trained and pass these tests that when we get in the noise and the din of battle, with slashing and crashing and booming and clinging and screaming and dying, will this horse that I'm riding keep its cool? Or is it going to go crazy because of the circumstances? And that's what they called meekness.
Hmm.
The meeker a horse was, the more pressure he could take and not react to it in a negative way. Strength under control. That was the definition of meekness.
Love that.
Now I can apply it to Jesus because that's what I
Yes.
see. He can be nailed and spit on and ribboned his back with a whip, but he's staying under control. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And that so spoke to me. It's changed my life, John. I find myself in circumstances where I say, either mentally, psychologically, financially, or physically, I could squash them like a bug right now for what they are doing or saying, but I choose not to.
Hmm.
I am meek. I have the strength to control myself. I don't have to react. And what I see, especially on social media, John, is everyone is
Oh,
overreacting to almost everything.
absolutely.
And so we've reached a place where we've created pain and division, and young people are actually going out and committing suicide because of what somebody said that triggered them on a post online. So meekness, and Jesus said, if you want to be really happy, be meek,
Be meek.
and I'll make sure that I love the finish of that. The reward always goes with his promise of happiness. And in this one is you will inherit the earth. So what we did in the book is we put inherit and merit up beside each other because people who are willing to do almost anything to prosper are people that think they have to merit everything. And Jesus actually said, if you'll listen to me, you will inherit what you're seeking instead of feeling like you need to merit what you're seeking.
Love that. Mike, I so appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate from the personal standpoint. Again, you think about that. That's so that, and that's why I think your book coming out perfect timing then with regards to hope, when that book comes out and tying that in, and where our hope is. Wow, I only got a couple more questions, Mike, and so I hope you have a few more minutes because I
Sure.
really want to get to these. Prior to hitting the record button, you've talked about in your ministry, obviously, that you are there to secure, not for you, but for leaders, more kingdom impact as well. And it's a word that I've been, or two words that I've been studying myself a good bit lately. And I'll use this. You've started a movement. I'm going to call it a movement. Those who would change the world, called Leaders in Fellowship. Tell me a little bit about that
Yeah.
and what you're doing to help other leaders, including business leaders, on their journey.
Well, and I appreciate that because my life, John, I have been to brag on God a minute. I have been really blessed with the success of what I was working toward and sought. My dad was a pastor, so I wanted to be a pastor. I got the education to be a pastor, but then Kathy and I moved to Dallas in 1976 and founded a church from nothing but our 2-year-old daughter and our 20-gallon tank with some goldfish in it and not a lot else. And we are blessed. And we've built a great ministry. I pastored it 40 years. I turned it over to the younger generation. And now I'm only writing and speaking on these things. So Leaders in Fellowship is a three-part vision to sharpen your leadership skills, to increase your strategic network of relationships. Because like we say in Texas, if you see a turtle on top of a fence post, he didn't get there by himself. So all of us have to have help. And then thirdly, that we move the kingdom forward. That's what it's about.
Love that. I look
So
forward to watching you on that journey with that.
yeah.
Really do.
So it's really it fills me with joy. I'm thankful for it, and I love telling leaders it's not about working to merit or deserve it, but a lot of them, John, do not have that word over their life, and that's something I want to do. Is like, look, if you could just hear something from an old guy that's been around and done it a while, here's what you need. Jesus, when he was baptized, he was 30 years old. He hadn't worked one miracle. No one in town hardly knew him. He was faithful to work with Joseph as a carpenter, but it was time for him to enter his ministry. When he was baptized, the heavens opened and the Father spoke over him and said, "This is my much loved Son, and I'm fully pleased with him." And Jesus went straight forward from that into the 40-day temptation and then into 3 years of exemplary ministry and then gave his life. He went in the strength of that word. And I'm finding lots of young men and women, John, who have never had that fatherly mentoring to say, you're loved, you're good enough, God called you. And what I want with this book, John, is that I'm going to be honest with you. Before I wrote it and did the work to write it, did the research, I wouldn't have put God and happy in the same sentence. I would have put God and holy or like serious stuff, but not happy. Now I understand, like any good father would, he wants to look at his children around his feet and laugh with them because he sees them operating full of joy. I think the church around the world has done a pretty good job with repentance and salvation and the basic tenets of faith. I don't think we've done a good enough job exemplifying happiness. I think we ought to stream out of churches or close our Bibles, whatever we're doing spiritual. And I think we ought to go out into the world and be absolute examples of what it means to be filled with happiness and joy.
So
So
great.
now I believe it isn't trivial to God. I think he does want us happy.
I believe he does as well. Mike, how do folks get in touch with you, and where do you want them to find the book as well?
Well, Amazon is a good place for the book, and I've got other things as well. In fact, I enjoy Audible books, so I recorded this book myself in my own voice, and it's available on Audible books. And then the book can be gotten on Amazon or anywhere, or they can go to, this is really important, John, because this is something that people can go, we're building an army. Literally, we are building an army, and we call it the Happy Army. And you can go to imrealhappy.com and join the Happy Army, and it doesn't cost a thing. And when you give me your email, we're going to stay in touch. We're going to have, our goal is by the end of 2025 to have 100,000 people signed up in a Happy Army. And we're going to start to demonstrate the joy that we found and the reality that the Word and Jesus and this book, John, when I was writing this, I got advice from Madison Avenue in New York City because my heart really was for this book not to be just for Christians who go to church. And I wanted to jump the fence. I wanted to really help people that need help. I got a really rewarding experience last week, John. I don't even know how I ended up on this guy's podcast. I did a podcast for a man who has thousands of insurance agencies across the nation. And I was speaking to them. And in the first 5 minutes, he told me, Pastor, I want to talk to you. What's your book about? But I want to tell you up front, both of my parents were atheists. I'm an atheist. I married an atheist. And so let's go. Well, I just talked about these principles like I've talked to you today, John. And 1 hour later, I had to say, I'm sure we both got stuff to do. We've got to get finished here, right? And he said, yeah, but I don't want to, Mike. He said, I could talk to you for hours.
Hmm.
And I will tell you, this is his words, not mine. He said, this is the best podcast I've ever done. And I want to have you back on to talk about this. See, I wrestle with whether or not to put Jesus in the subtitle on this, but I decided to do that for a reason because, John, I don't think most people's problem is with Jesus. I think most people's problem is with what messed up religions have done to them and the concepts that they've heard or seen that don't represent. So this is all about the wisest man that ever lived, his teaching, and people are receiving it and taking it, and we're hearing so many good reports that I'm so thankful for. And so I hope people join us. I hope they join the Happy Army so I can just contact them about once every week or two and give them something to be really happy about.
Well, I'll put the link in the show notes. Let's get folks out there. I'mRealHappy.com and join the Army. I think it's a great cause. Mike, you've been very gracious with your time. I know I've well overtaken what I committed to you, and I appreciate your time. As he said, I could continue to talk to you, and I hope we get the chance to do it again. As a first-time guest, I'll finish you though with the same question. I'll give you the last word for folks, and I'm going to give you a billboard. They're right there in Dallas, Texas. You can put it anywhere you want to, so millions will see it. What's the message you're going to put on that billboard, and why do you put that message there?
I'm going to put, I'm real happy, and right below it, I'm going to put, I wish I'd have known all this earlier, because I lived for years not fully understanding a subject that I should have really delved into. But for some reason, I was deceived. I thought it was trivial. I thought, I'll close with this quickly, John. When I came out with the book, a reviewer, one of the first reviews that hit social media, this guy just blasted me. And the first paragraph, he said that if I was a Bible teacher, I was misquoting and I was a false prophet and I was a heretic. And here was his statement: God wants us to be holy. He doesn't care if we're happy.
Mm.
So my publicist called me and she said, what do you want me to do? How should we respond to this review? And I said, do the same thing I just did. I gave it a thumbs up and good comments. And she's like, really? And I said, really, because that's exactly what I expected from someone who is still there where I used to be.
Mm.
I used to think God was more important. It was more important for me to be holy, which was performance based, than to be happy. And what I would say to that young man and everybody who has that same issue, Jesus said this: the kingdom of heaven is righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. It couldn't be plainer than that. And joy made the list of his top three. But the first one is righteousness. And here's what I would say, John. Not until I got the righteousness component clear did I have peace and joy.
Hmm.
So the second and third component is contingent on the first. And if you think that your sense of righteousness is based on you being perfect enough to earn it, then good luck. But the reality is, the reason I'm so happy is because God made me righteous through the offering of his only son.
Mm-hmm.
And now my righteousness is not my own, but is his. And that makes me really happy, because I spent many years trying to be good enough to please a reluctant and angry God. I wish I'd have known sooner that he was filled with joy over me. He created me, he loves me, and he made me righteous. And I'm going to live every day of my life happy about that.
So good. So good. Dr. Mike Hayes, thank you so much for bringing it on the Uncommon Leader podcast. I wish you the best in this book and more to come as well.
And you as well, John. Thank you so much.